Thank you for joining us and welcome to the G25 Grant Administration Workshop. My name is Jessica Terry and I'm joined by my colleague Daniel Middaugh. Together we have almost 10 years of grant experience within this program, and we're excited to share some information with you that will hopefully set you up for success with your new and existing projects. One thing to note before we get started is who is eligible for an advance. In the regulations, you'll notice that it states generally advances are not allowed. However, if extenuating circumstances exist, the OHMVR division may consider granting an advance. Now, what does that mean in practice? What that means is your agency will need to show that you require funds prior to starting your project, like with what we see with nonprofits, for example, or within the Bureau of Land Management policies. If you don't think this applies to your agency, we recommend watching our reimbursement session, which we also have recorded here, titled also the G25 Admin Workshop. Let's go ahead and take a peek at the agenda today for the advanced session. Next slide, please. All right, so first we're going to start with reviewing the G25 regulation updates that will affect the grant administration of your projects. We'll then review the advance process from the finalized project agreement to receiving your advance. We're also going to highlight grant administration tips and where to find the forms. We'll also review some best practices and recommendations for organization of your submission. We'll then move into reviewing common issues we see within the advance forms and reconciliations, and we'll touch on what's due at the final closeout. Lastly, we'll end with our contact information, and let's go ahead and jump right into those G25 reg updates. Next slide, please.
We've made several changes to the G25 regulations, and some of them are more impactful than others. So we're just going to go over some of the highlights here. We do encourage you to go to our website and pull the full G25 regulations so that you can review those in your own time. But some of those highlights include an expanded definition, a new definition for major repairs, which is anything exceeding $750 and is not part of regularly scheduled maintenance. Another change is to transportation costs. Those can now no longer exceed the actual cost. So you do need to submit a receipt, the invoice, or some other type of documentation showing the cost of transportation. A more significant change is an expanded definition to equipment, which now includes heavy equipment and trailers. So you're going to see that throughout this presentation in a few different parts. For instance, a new ineligible cost is damage to heavy equipment or trailers that's caused by the grantee. So please be careful when you're backing up in a tight space. Our equipment disposition form has also been updated to include heavy equipment and trailers. Filling it out is the same, and you'll submit that to our ohv.grants@parks.ca.gov email address, and someone will take care of your request when you do. Next slide, please. Right. Another small change to our publication requirements. Like before, all published materials that include the OHMVR logo must be approved by the division prior to publication. New in G25 is that publications paid for with grant funds must be distributed for free. That's whether it's by you or maybe you give maps to like a local shop or a partner organization. They also have to distribute those maps for free. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Daniel. And this slide covers the changes to our reallocation request form. We've added guidelines clarifying that if you're moving costs within the same project cost estimate category, that will require an email to your grant admin. But if you're moving costs from one category to another category to cover your changes, that's when you're going to be submitting your reallocation request form prior to those costs being incurred. And it's important to note that we cannot approve any forms past the end of your project performance period, or we will need to deny those costs. So in other words, if there are changes to your staff line items, but you don't need to shift funds from one category to cover those changes, all you need to do is send an email to your grant admin, and we both save those emails to the project folder, which should of course include your reasoning. But if you decide to move funds from, let's say, the contract category to the staff category, you are required to submit the reallocation request form and get that approved prior to those costs being incurred, and obviously before the end of the project performance period, so that we could approve and allow those. If you need help filling out the form, we're here to help. You can definitely set up a call and we'll help you fill out your first few forms, but we are going to go ahead and review that on the following slides. It's also good to note that online we have a video that covers tips on how to fill out the reallocation request form, and it also covers budget tracking tips as well. Next slide, please. All right, so here's part of the form. You're seeing just below the header where it just has your agency information and that type of thing. And the example here is a very common scenario where the grantee had originally planned on initiating a contract for trail maintenance, but due to a delay in getting their project agreement signed, they didn't have time to go through the formal contract process with their agency. They decided to shift funds from the original contract line item to the staff and equipment use categories so their internal team could move forward with the on-the-ground work and with a rented mini excavator. No deliverables were changing, so they didn't need to add much to the final section at the bottom of the form. And since the grantee was requesting to add a new line item, the grant admin needed to review this just like they would review a new PCE line item while reviewing grant applications with the team. We may reach out to experts or our supervisor depending on the amount of funds that you're requesting to move and or what that new line item is. In this example, the grant admin should ask for the level of the staff position, like the GS level at the forest, for example, the hourly rate they're asking for, and the amount of work planned compared to what was identified in that original contract. In addition, the grant admin, based on the details that are here, will ask for more details on the mini X rental, such as how many days it will be used and how the grantee determined the rate that they're asking for. And for anyone watching that has submitted an application to us in the past, this probably all sounds familiar. You might get comments like this during the preliminary review. So this should be something that you're used to doing already. For everybody else, just make sure that those details are included, which will reduce the chance that we'll send it back to you with more information. Let's go ahead and move on to the next regulatory update.
Okay, so for G25, the DPR 364 form does have an update. This is actually a previous regulation, but we are making sure that it's emphasized on the form. And that is that for advanced payments, they must be placed in an interest-bearing account if legally able to do so. Law enforcement grantees are exempt from this. And this is kind of one of those things where you know if you are legally able to do so. So please just make sure that you're paying attention to that, and we'll also revisit this in just a few slides. Next slide, please. Right, our Project Accomplishment Report form, or PAR form, has several updates also. Here you'll see in section 6 for equipment purchases. Like I previously mentioned, heavy equipment and trailers have been added. So make sure that you tick yes on this box if you purchased equipment, heavy equipment, or trailers. And you also want to include a description of how that equipment was used in your project. Please make sure when you're filling out the PAR form that you are using the G25 most current one and the form appropriate for your project type. The PAR forms, there are different versions for each project type, and if you're the type of person that saves documents on your desktop, you want to make sure that you have the right one. Next slide, please. As I mentioned a couple slides back, advance funds must be placed into an interest-bearing account if you're legally able to do so. So this has been added to the PAR form. If you've placed funds into an interest-bearing account, please make sure that you tick this box and that you explained how interest earned funds were used in the project. Next slide, please.
Another requirement that was common practice but now is codified in the regs is the requirement for a sample of photos showing deliverables, which should be submitted with every PAR. For each photo, you'll want to include GPS coordinates and ideally not only provide before and after photos, but also which deliverables were completed. So you can see in this example, they put the GPS coordinates above the image, and below that, they're telling us what deliverable was accomplished with that work. Also, whenever possible, if you could submit a Word template, that is the requirement for the photos. That way it makes it easier for us to see them. Sometimes if you convert them into other formats, you're losing quality. So please do, whenever possible, submit it on Word. The new SharePoint submission we'll review with you will make it a lot easier to put in larger files. Next slide, please. Another update is for those of you who have ground disturbing projects, we want to make sure that you're aware that when selecting a teammate to perform the required special status species surveys and monitoring, it must be conducted by a qualified biological monitor or under the supervision of a qualified biological monitor. Next slide, please.
Okay, don't worry, some of these regulation changes are going to make things a little easier. For instance, if you happen to owe a refund to the department, those are going to now be due within 90 calendar days from receiving notification. In the past, that was due within 60 days. But please keep in mind that this is only for G25 projects. If you're closing out a project from a previous grant cycle, the 60 calendar day requirement still applies. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about the advance payment process. What you're looking at here is a high-level overview from the beginning of your award to payment and to closeout. So the first thing that you start with is getting your project agreement finalized and signed so that we can create your purchase order number. That's a fancy number that we use to issue payments. The project agreement is going to define your project performance period, which is the period that you can work on your project and spend funds. So you do want to make sure that you get that in place as soon as possible. Once you have that in place, you can submit your first advance justification request. Typically, that's going to be for 50% of grant funds. There are exceptions to that, but they are very rare. So odds are you're not going to fall in that category. But if you think you do, reach out to your grant administrator and we can help you out with that. Once we receive your advance justification request, our grant supervisor will review and approve it. We enter payment into our payment system and the state controller's office or SCO approves it. That's when the warrant or the check is issued. Typically, it takes about 4 weeks to receive that. So if it's been 5 weeks, reach out to your grant administrator and we'll look into it for you. Once you receive your warrant, you'll start expending funds on the project. And at some point, you will submit a reconciliation for that first advance and also submit your second advance request at that time. When you submit your reconciliation, you're going to have an advance expenditure workbook, your supporting documentation, PAR, your photos, all that good stuff, and your grant administrator will review it. Once we do, we'll approve the second advance funds. And again, you get to spend money. And once the project wraps up, you'll submit a final advance reconciliation. Again, with your expenditure workbook, supporting documentation. We'll review it, approve it. Our supervisor will also take a look and approve it. But once you do, you're the happy guy in the corner because you have successfully completed your project. Next slide, please.
Here's a list of grant admin tips that we've composed for you. First, you'll want to get your project agreement finalized, like Daniel just said, which typically includes finalizing adjustments requested within your factual findings, which will adjust within the project cost estimate of your application in Olga. You'll also be selecting a start date for your project, which tends to be the same date every year for most of you. If your project's ending December 31st, typically your start date for your new ground ops project, for example, would be the 1st of January the following year, so that there's no gaps, right? And lastly, once you select your start date and you make your changes in Olga, that's when our compliance team is going to send you the project agreement so you can have your authorized rep sign it. And once they do, you send it back to us. Our manager will then sign it, and then compliance will send out that final project agreement with all the signatures on it. Now, why do you need your finalized project agreement? Well, first, it's your project scope and cost roadmap. Definitely something good to share with the team, especially with the changes to the requirements for the reallocation request form. You'll want to be on the same page before you start your project. But also, many agencies need the project agreement to set up their job codes, or to initiate equipment purchases, or to set up contracts, for example. So please, lay out a proactive plan that's going to start with signing, get those project agreements finalized. Next slide, please. Speaking of contracts, our program requires invoices. So when you establish your contracts, please build that requirement into the language, or at least have this understanding with your contractor. We've seen a lot of delays with payment requests or reconciliations this year because there were no invoices on file, and the agency had to go scramble and work with their contractor to attempt to do that. So we definitely wanted to give you that tip now as you start your projects. For nonprofits, a customized tip for you, get those advances in, the advance justification form in as soon as possible, because it can take up to 2 months to receive a check if there's any delays or a big rush at that time. From the time you submit it to all the way through our department to the state controller's office. For the BLM, same tip, get your advance forms in as soon as possible. Once your advance is received by your California State office here in Sacramento, they can then set up your job codes for grant and match. So, that should be a priority for you, so you can get your job started with no delay. Next slide, please.
We are happy to announce that we have launched a new SharePoint website. In the past, submitting large file sizes has been a problem for some grantees. Either they need to be broken up into multiple emails or sent through a cloud service like box.com. But now with our new SharePoint size, you'll be able to submit large files directly to the department and not have to go through all that trouble. You can still submit via email, that's totally fine. But please do check out the new SharePoint site and use that, especially if you're submitting large file sizes. Speaking of files, we do have some preferences for file formats. PDFs, we prefer that for things like receipts, invoices, contracts, your DPR 364 forms that need to be signed. So keep those in those formats. Picture files, we do prefer Microsoft Word, like Jess had mentioned earlier. And it's actually not a new request. It has been on our PAR form as far back as 2019. We do prefer Microsoft Word for photos because it doesn't compress the photos the same way that Adobe does. And that allows us to get a really good look at the wonderful work that you're doing. Excel files, we want you to keep your expenditure workbook and your PAR forms in Excel. That just helps with our review. Makes things a little bit easier for us, and having an easier review means that we get it done faster. We can get your check in advance issued a little bit faster, and we can get your project closed out a little bit faster too. So keeping your files in these formats that reduces back and forth corrections So please keep that in mind when you're putting together your supporting documentation. Finally, good file organization goes a long way with our review. So Jess is going to go into some more detail on that right now.
Absolutely. One of the most impactful things you can do to help speed up our review is labeling your documents well. It's also recommended that you keep your titles short with no spaces nor special characters. This is a tip that our IT team gave us that will reduce the chance that the file gets corrupted, which you definitely don't want to happen a couple years from now if the project gets selected for an audit. And you go to double click and open it and it's corrupted. So again, keep your title short, no spaces, no special characters. This style isn't required, but it's an example of incorporating those tips into something that's working really well for us. We launched it a few years ago and have noticed a lot of grantees are using it or something similar to it, which has been really helpful. When you add the project agreement and the payment request number within the title, for that payment request form example there at the top, or within that workbook example at the top, it allows us to be able to, at a glance, see what you've submitted, but also when it's time to review your second advance reconciliation, for example, we need to pull up the first workbook to see what you claimed and compare it, right? So if you have just a simple PR1 versus PR2 at the end of that title, it makes it so that we can open both up. The other examples we have listed in the middle of the screen are for the documents that you'll be submitting, your supporting documentation, and you'll notice that we have it listed in the rank that category is listed on the workbook from grant to match. You're also noticing that there is a mention of grant or match, which is indicating what is being claimed within those supporting documentation pieces. You have examples of attachment numbers, whether it's just one attachment number or a date range included within that document. And this format can help your team as well, especially if the project gets selected for an audit. Let's say you've moved on, you've got a promotion, and now it's the team that's remaining behind. You want the team to be able to jump in and grab whatever that auditor is asking for, and having really good labeling is going to help you do so. At the bottom, you can see examples of what we recommend for the project accomplishment report, just shortening it to PAR with the 1. The soils compliance report, SCR, just simple, and then the habitat management program, which would commonly be referred to as the HMP in our program. For anyone who's using this format already, thank you so much. Anybody that has questions on this or format that you use, something that we can find a happy medium on, definitely reach out and we're more than happy to work with you. Next slide, please.
Let's talk about receipts and invoices. You might notice a difference between the two examples on the slide here. Like I had said a couple slides back, we do prefer that you submit these in PDF format. But when you do that, we do want to make sure that they are legible. We should be able to see the date of the purchase. We should be able to see the cost for the item, see what the item is, the total amount. If it's a bad copy, a bad scan, please don't handwrite a total or handwrite the item. If you do that, we are going to request a clean copy. And like I had mentioned before, that type of back and forth, getting a new copy, that's something that could potentially delay a payment being sent out. So you do want to make sure that you get these clean scans for us. We do understand that some small companies use handwritten invoices, and those are okay, that's fine. But we're talking more about like these Home Depot receipts that you see on here. You don't want to handwrite anything on there. Some tips for you, just make sure that you get your scan done as soon as possible. You don't want it sitting in your wallet or on your dashboard too long. That can make the receipt fade in and of itself. Also, make sure that you get a clean copy from the store. If it doesn't look good, just have the store reprint it then and there so you're not chasing down a receipt later. And also just double check your file before submitting it. You may not be aware that the scanner didn't get a good copy. So just quickly double checking, make sure that it looks good before sending it over to us. For nonprofits, keep in mind that for invoices, you do have to have a zero balance on that. So you do need to show that it has been paid either with a paid stamp with a date on it, some other type of proof of payment like a bank statement, a credit card statement, something like that, so we know that the invoice has been paid. With a receipt like this, it's pretty clear that we do see a MasterCard was used. So that's all easy for us to verify. But for like those handwritten invoices, something like that, you'll want to make sure that you also submit a proof of payment. Next slide, please.
Such good tips, Daniel. And, we definitely want to reimburse you for all your items. So, hopefully these tips help be proactive. I didn't even think that the heat can affect the receipt. We recently learned that from our teammate Heidi, who's advancing our slides today. So just little things like that one wouldn't think of that could result in us not reimbursing you for an item. Now, this example is an invoice that we consider gold standard just for the labeling. The grantee added an attachment number in the top right. They pointed out what line items this purchase falls under. In this case, it's materials and supplies, number 6. Then they added a breakdown of the totals they're claiming on the workbook in red at the bottom near the total. And in addition to the date being highlighted, they also highlighted that original total, which is always appreciated. A lot of folks think they need to submit a separate invoice for if they're claiming a grant total and a match total. That's not the case. You can just submit one invoice and just simply break it down like this and just use it as one supporting documentation, which is preferred. And when we look at those receipts and invoices, we're checking the date to make sure that it falls within the performance period. We try to figure out what line item on your project agreement it falls within. And when you add notes like this, it takes a lot of the guesswork out, which speeds up our reviews. We also are looking for totals to make sure that it matches what you're claiming on the workbook. So having a breakdown like this in red is really helpful. Besides organizing your documents, adding details like this is by far one of the most impactful things you can do to help us speed up our reviews. Also notice in this example, they highlighted one item in the middle in yellow, and that was simply a call out of an indirect line item. So they highlighted it in yellow and they put that total down below as a breakdown of what indirect grant they were claiming, which was really helpful, easy to find on the workbook. Something that will slow you down is if we're looking at an invoice and let's say just that highlighted totals there, we're looking for that on the workbook and we don't see it, obviously we're gonna have to slow down, try to figure it out, break it up. Often you're just gonna get an email back to us and say, we're not quite sure where this line item falls on that workbook. So breaking it out like this is very, very helpful. Lastly, when you're adding attachment numbers like they did on this example, it allows you to be able to scan them all together and put them in the order of the attachment number, which is really helpful for us. Let's say we've received hundreds of documents within a submission, which is pretty common. And if we are double clicking each document, each PDF scan of an invoice or receipt, opening it up, reviewing it, and then having to close it, it really slows us down. But if you put an attachment number on it and you scan them together and you put the date range and the title, now all we have to do is double click it once, we open it up and we sit and scroll through and check off all those different items on the workbook. And that can definitely help out. Let's go to review the next slide, please.
All right, so we've shared and talked about a few different forms today, so we want to make sure that you know where to find them. If you go to any search engine and type in OHMVR, we're going to be the first thing that comes up. When you get there to our homepage, just click on the grants up top. You'll find a submenu there, which includes grant forms, where the arrow is pointing. And once you click there, you'll be brought to our forms page, which includes, as the arrow is pointing out, the advanced payment workbook and advanced justification form. But you'll also find the reallocation request form and the project accomplishment reports form. Make sure that you do select the correct PAR form for your project type because they do differ. And we actually are adding or have added the forms to our SharePoint website that we mentioned earlier. So you'll also be able to find all of those forms there. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to review some common issues we see within the advanced justification form, which is what you're going to use to request your advance. At the top, you're going to fill out all the information from your project agreement. You could even just cut and paste it over because you don't want to shorten your agency name or anything like that. You want to have a match so that when the state controller's office compares it to your project agreement, they see the exact same thing and they're less likely to kick it back. Each advance, you're going to change the request number in the top right from the first advance to the second advance, and you'll change the payment request period date range to show the date range that's going to encompass all of the staff time and expenditures that you're seeking within that request. For the justification, you just need it to make sense. In this example, the nonprofit is explaining they don't have funds on hand to start the project, and they're explaining what the requested funds will go towards. It's clear in the line items they need funds to initiate their trail maintenance contract, and they need OHV trail signs and delineators to go hand in hand with that work. So easy for us to prove. We'll just send this over to our supervisor and then he signs it. Next slide, please.
Reviewing some of the common issues on our DPR 364 form. Up top, you'll see some highlighted areas with arrows. You want to make sure that you're using the correct numbers for this grant cycle, the contract number, your activity code, and the ENY. These do change every year, so please make sure that you have the correct number in there. If you used last year's, your payment will be kicked back, and that's just going to further delay you getting your advance. Also, make sure that you do tick the advance box there. We kind of went over this part earlier. This is where you'll see that advance funds must be placed in an interest-bearing account, so keep that in mind as well. Please make sure that you have your correct payment number if it's your first or second advance. If it is your final, make sure that you tick that box right there, kind of in the middle of the slide. Next slide, please.
Now, this section of the slide is just below the section that Daniel was reviewing of the DPR 364. And here we often see missing information in the locations that you see listed on your grant and match totals. For both your first and second advance, you'll enter your grant amount in section 6A. You can find that on your project agreement along with all the financial information that Daniel was just reviewing at the top. And in this example, that 6A section is right in the middle of this screenshot. You can see a total of $172,000, and that was their total award. For your second advance, along with entering your grant amount again, you'll also list your first advance total within 6B. So that's just below the grant award amount. At the bottom, you're going to enter your total match to date, which should match your first advance reconciliation totals from your workbook. And you'll also add the breakdown of your match category totals within section 5B, which is in the top right of this screenshot. And what we'll do is we'll go look at that first advance reconciliation workbook and make sure that all of those totals match. So definitely do that before you get that signed, sent off and signed to your authorized representative. Next slide, please.
Last but not least on the DPR 364 form is the address information and the signature. With the address, you do want to make sure that you're using the address that you originally registered with. If your address has changed, you do need to fill out a form, so please reach out to your grant administrator ASAP so that we can get that on file. If you put the wrong address in there, it will be kicked back. And also, please make sure that you sign the form. This probably gets missed more often than you might think. So you can use a pen, then scan the DPR 364, use Adobe, use DocuSign. Whatever works easiest for you, but do make sure that you do sign it. Next slide, please.
All right, so now we're going to move into the common issues we see within the Advanced Reconciliation Workbook. Most commonly, we see the allocation row not filled out, which is key to all of the totals working together on the Summary tab. We'll show these on the next slide. Below the allocation section, we see missing first advance totals. We also see workbooks where the grantee forgot to list or update their match percentage. Maybe it's a grantee who's using a workbook from a prior award, but they just forgot to change it, their match from 25 to 26%. That's another thing that you can find on your project agreement. On the grant and match tabs, we often see missing attachment numbers or no description of what the line item is in the notes section. So let's go ahead and look at the form and see these sections. We'll give you more tips. Next slide, please. All right, so I've zoomed in on this screenshot. This is the summary tab of our workbook. Daniel is going to review the two sections that I have arrows pointing to. The section at the bottom is one of the most important places to keep an eye on regarding your match and indirect percentages. A lot of grantees use the workbook as a budget tracker where they're putting in their expenditures on the grant and match tab, and it's loading up here, and you can see where you're at with your over and unders. Let's go ahead and zoom in and see what the form looks like in detail.
All right, so a small but helpful thing that you can do is fill out the grant allocation line with your award amount. If you're not sure what those numbers are, please refer to your project agreement. You can go to the project cost estimate section and scroll through each category. There is a total at the bottom there, and putting that information in here will help you keep track of your advance requests and your spending. Also, this is your second advance. Make sure that you enter your first advance allocation. That also helps keep track of the spending. Below, we have the match and the indirect trackers. The cell highlighted orange here is your minimum match required. You do need to enter that manually. If you're not sure what that number is, again, you can find that in your project agreement. Entering that number will allow the cells below to automatically populate, so that way you are monitoring your match spending throughout the life of the project. The indirect, since that's a fixed 15%, that does populate automatically as you enter your spending. But like just said, this is a really important section to keep an eye on. The last thing you want is to be closing out your project and you find out that you're over on your indirect or you aren't meeting your match requirement. That means some of your spending might get reduced, or you may even owe a refund to the department. So yeah, keep an eye on that so you don't have to deal with that headache. But if you do, we do have 90 days for that refund to be received now. So I guess that's a small silver lining. Next slide, please.
Great, Daniel, thank you so much. Those are great tips. For on this slide, I'm zoomed out so you can see what the grant and match tab looks like, which is the same. They're both same, just different titles at the top. And at the top of the columns, you're going to see the name of each category from your project agreement, along with a place to add an attachment number and a note for each line item, which we'll zoom in on in a moment. If you have one tab, for your grant expenditures, and then you have one tab for your match. They both have the same format. And what's cool is that all of those totals are actually going to populate into that summary tab. And so that's what's driving all of those numbers, along with the allocation row and your match percentage, is actually what you're inputting here. So again, this is a reason why a lot of folks will use this for their budget tracking purposes, because it tells you where you're at with your categories over and under, how you're trending on your match and your indirect. We tried to make this a really user-friendly workbook to use. Let's go ahead and zoom in, please. Next slide. And on this slide, we are zoomed in on the contract and materials and supplies columns. This is a gold standard by far, where the grantee listed the totals, they listed the attachment numbers, and in the notes section, they listed the project cost estimate line item number and description of what the line items are, like their trail maintenance contract, which is contract line item number 3, their OHV signs, brochures, and straw bales, which is materials and supplies line items 4 and 6. That makes it loud and clear. All we have to do at this point is just look to make sure we agree with that, and then we check it in, move on to the next item. So really good communication here. Oftentimes we'll see words like Home Depot or Amazon listed in the notes, which doesn't help us point to what line item you're claiming that within. We can obviously see it's a Home Depot receipt or Amazon, and really it's that attachment number that's pointing us to that supporting documentation. The putting in detailed notes like this example has is really one of the best things that you can do with regards to communicating to us what you're claiming. Not only is it helpful for us to have this information, but if you're doing this exercise and you're trying to label it yourself and figure out what line item it falls under, the crew's been out spending all this money, and now maybe you're the person that's putting it all together in the workbook, and you can't even find where it goes in the project cost estimate. Probably a time for a reallocation request to see if we can even get that item approved. Definitely you could just send a quick email to us and we can help explain what the next steps would be if the team purchased something that they shouldn't have. Next slide, please. We also wanted to highlight the requirements for volunteer reporting, because we often receive various volunteer sign-in sheets and summaries which are missing at least one of the required data points. And regardless if you use your internal forms or you compose an Excel summary, which we definitely prefer, what we need on your supporting documentation are the following. We need the volunteer's name, we need the dates and hours worked, the activities they performed related to the deliverables from your project agreement, the rate you're claiming, which also should match the rate claimed on your project agreement. Even if that rate goes up, you're still locked into that rate that was approved. And we should also see a formula that shows us how you determine the total you're claiming on the workbook. You can definitely use your internal forms, but if they're missing any of these data points, you would need to add that information in by hand or PDF editor. If you're turning in those sign-in sheets as your supporting documentation, which again isn't required, but if you did, you do need to ensure that all of the volunteers have signed their sign-in spot on the sheet, and you're going to make sure that a supervisor or a lead signed off on each sheet. So one signature at the bottom of someone in leadership basically signing off they agree with all the hours that the volunteer had claimed. This is an audit requirement, so if you're turning in the sign-in sheets, we're going to check it for the audit requirement. But again, honestly, putting it in Excel, pulling all the data points out is so much better for us, because oftentimes, we'll be looking at the volunteers, maybe they've worked a really long day and they're tired, but you can't quite tell what is that, an 8 or a 5 for the hours they're claiming, and it's something that we have to check. We also have to manually kind of add up all those different hours to make sure we agree with the total you've claimed. And if it's in Excel, all we have to do is check the formulas. So I think you know our preference at this point for volunteer reporting. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to move into common issues we see within the project accomplishment report, also known as the PAR. The most common issue we've been seeing within the PAR are a mismatch of the grant and match hours in relation to the labor report and volunteer summaries you submit. So please do double check your totals and make sure they align with your supporting documents. Your grant and match hours should both be listed on your PAR. And think of it like this. It's really a holistic snapshot of your entire submission. Usually the grant administrators will go and start just by looking at the project accomplishment report and your awesome photos of the work you've done, just to give us an idea of what we're going to look at. And then we start looking through your supporting documentation to see if it all makes sense, that it's all related. We also see where the routes and the areas are lumped into one line item on the PAR, which we'll see where it's broken down on the following slide. But let's say the public reaches out to us and states that you're not doing work in a certain area that you had on your application. Well, the first place we're going to go is the PAR. We're going to go to the PAR and look for all the different breakdowns. But let's say you know, your BLM and you have just your one general region listed. It's not going to help us see the different OHV areas that you've done work in, right? So we're not going to be able to, you know, respond to the public, but also for the purposes of our own review, we're not really going to be able to line up if the work you're doing aligns with what you had on your application. So definitely using your application as a guide, breaking it out by those different areas, that's what we're looking for. We also need you to list either acres or miles, which will depend on the type of work you're doing, but you don't need to list both. And for the deliverables, you always want to make sure that there's an OHV nexus, that it's clear that what the work you're doing is not only related to what was agreed to in the project agreement, but it's related to OHV in general, right? So make sure that you have a good amount of detail to help tell that story. Other things that we see missing or incomplete are the list of indirect items in the indirect section. So we'll zoom in on that and show you what we're looking for. And there's also a section at the very bottom of your project accomplishment report where if you haven't expended all of your funds, you're putting the total and you're listing a description of that. Within the final advance reconciliation, we're actually often not finding a description there if there's any funds remaining. So do make sure that you double check all these commonly missed items. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like on the PAR. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, it's a lot of information, so we wanted to show you how that looks in practice. So this is the top half of the PAR form, and what you see is the top here, what Jess was talking about with your routes and your areas where work was completed. In this example, you can see that they separated out into specific areas rather than a large general area. Acres versus miles, it's typically going to be one or the other. Miles, that's going to be something like trail work, brushing, something like that. Acres, that could be a restoration area, or maybe you're building like a new staging area, something like that. Make sure your hours worked are logged appropriately, and in the work completed, you do want to be clear what work was done and make sure that there is an OHV nexus with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving down the PAR form, section 2, that's where you're going to include any work that's not mentioned above. So that could be something maybe like handing out maps, or maybe a booth at some type of expo that you were attending. Boxes, sections 3 and 4, these are just boxes that you want to make sure you check to let us know how your spending is trending. So just make sure that you don't miss that. It happens sometimes. The indirect cost, section 5. This is one where a lot of times we'll get very brief or vague explanations of what's going on. And we really want to encourage you to be as detailed as possible on what your indirect spending is. So please, more information, as much as you want. More is always better than less. Section 6, was equipment, heavy equipment, or trailers purchased? Kind of mentioned this earlier with the changes to the G25 regulations and the addition of heavy equipment and trailers. If you did make a purchase, make sure you tick the box yes and provide an explanation of how the equipment was used in the project. For 7, before and after pictures, just went over some of the changes for that already, and you'll see that it does ask that these are submitted in a workbook, in a Word document. So please make sure that you tick the box and include the Word file if you have that. LE projects are exempt from sending in photos. You can, but you're not required to. And the final payment section, if you weren't able to spend all of your funds, it happens. We understand. There could be staffing issues, weather issues. Um, you know, if it happened, just let us know what happened. You're not going to get in trouble. We're not going to hold it against you. But we do want to know what type of roadblocks you ran into with the projects that you weren't able to spend all of those funds. Next slide, please.
All right, just 3 more slides to go, and we're done with the presentation today. And when you're done with your project, this is what's due within your final payment request, which must be received within to the division within 120 days of your project performance end date to keep your agency in good standing. On your workbook, on the summary tab that we reviewed, you're looking at the bottom to verify that you have reached or exceeded your match percentage. You'll also want to ensure you have not exceeded the maximum of 15% for indirect. All of your project deliverables should be completed, and if they aren't, the funds in relation to what you did not complete should remain unexpended, which you'll explain in the box that we just reviewed at the end of the PAR. If you have documents listed within your deliverables, like reports or monitoring, please include those documents. We often send those to our environmental science team. And speaking of the environmental science team, we have a tip for you. If you have your soils and HMP already completed, even before you're done putting together your final reconciliation workbook, feel free to send those in to us right away to beat the rush. We do have to send those off to our environmental science experts who are going to review and approve them. And until they review and approve them, we're not able to close out your project. So, and those reviews can take up to 30 days. It just depends on how many they're received at the same time. So just a tip to you, feel free to send in your HMP and soils as soon as possible, and then follow it with the workbook. Just keep in mind, everything should be received within that 120-day deadline of your end date. Next slide, please.
Before we wrap up, we wanted to share our Contact Us page with you. We have all of the contact information for the team, phone numbers, email address. You can find your grant administrator's information on here. And if you're not sure who your grant administrator is, you can click the Grant Administrator Agency Assignment list at the bottom where that arrow is pointing. And it will tell you who your grant administrator is, so you know exactly who to reach out to. That is up to date with all of our current staff, so if you aren't sure, please check it out. We also have the contact information for our compliance unit, who we work with from time to time, and our environmental review team. So if you do have questions with your soil compliance report or your HMP, you'll be able to find someone to ask those questions to. Next slide, please.
All right, well, we wanted to end our session with our contact information, which is found on the page that Daniel just reviewed. I'm sure you're seeing a couple new names here. We've got Heidi Burns, one of our new grant administration folks. She's been helping us advance the PowerPoint today. Thank you so much, Heidi. We also have Lauren Porter starting in a couple weeks. I'm sure she'll be delighted when she watches this for the first time, and she's already mentioned before she starts. And then we have Lisa Fernandez, who's been around a long time. She's our retired annuitant who's helping us with our law enforcement projects. And then you have, of course, Daniel and I at the top. That is your grant administration team. We love to help you. We love what we do. It's part of why we wanted to put all of this content together to help you. But you can reach out if we didn't touch on something that you still have questions on. And if you have not received an email to be invited to the new SharePoint page, please reach out to our general grants team email, which is ohv.grants@parks.ca.gov, and we can go ahead and get you added. We just wanted to thank you so much for attending today, and again, reach out if you have any questions. We hope you have a fabulous day. Thank you.